The point of this tutorial is to discuss columns. And when we're working with print or web, we're always thinking about the grid and working within our columns. So most times we are thinking about, is this a 1-column, a 2-column, or a 3-column layout? This layout here has included all 3 columns, 1, 2, or 3. Could you have 4, 5, 6? Of course. You can have as many columns as that can fit and aesthetically is pleasing within your composition. But today we're specifically going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. We're also going to discuss the concept of the inner and the outer. When we look at this basic layout that could turn into a beautiful website with the right graphics and font choices, etc., this is a very basic layout, but it includes all these concepts that I'm talking about. So if I look at this, and I can make this a little bit bigger, I want this red box to kind of continue forever and ever and ever. And what we're talking about there is something that's 100% width. Now, so these objects, which would be the logo and our nav bar, do not float all the way over here and float all the way over here on my huge monitor. We have to create this kind of container to contain them in. And sometimes I'll refer to that as a container div or an inner, thinking about those two words interchangeably. So we'll come back over here, and I'm going to move those back in. We need a container div. So think about that as an invisible box that would go, that's not too invisible, is it? Like so. So this invisible box is going to keep the logo within, it's going to keep the nav bar within, and then we have still another div on the outside that's 100%. So what we essentially have here at the top is one div or a box that's going to be 100% in this red. And then we're going to have nested within it another box or div that has a set width or a max width. So what that allows is that we have something that's 100% as the outer, and then the inner div is going to contain our two final objects, which is the logo and the nav bar. Now in this instance, this is a 2-column layout because 2 items are side by side. Thinking about columns like you read in text, a magazine. These are 2 different columns that are within this inner and within this outer. I like to kind of think about this section right here like the Russian nesting dolls. Thinking about how one doll is within another doll within another doll. That's what we're doing here, and that's called nesting. So to create this layout is actually going to take at least 4 boxes or 4 divs. We have the outer, we have the inner, we have the logo, and we have the nav. Now moving down here below, we have one big image, and this is a 1-column because we have nothing on either side of it. So this could be a 1-column layout, and then underneath this, to have everything come back together, is a 3-column layout where this could include images or text or so on and so forth. They do not have a specific color. They're just kind of a transparent background with content that's going to float in. And this is a very common 3-column layout as a footer because we can put the address, the phone number, the social media, the copyright, anything we want to do there. Now, again, you have to think about this, even though we don't have a colored background here like we did up here for the outer, there is an invisible box you want to picture there because I don't want column floating all the way over here and I don't want this column floating over here, or we'll have these really wide columns. So even though you specifically don't have the color instance like up here, there still will be an inner that will be placed here to contain these so they're not floating to either side of a large monitor. And sometimes this is hard to see, especially when you're working on a laptop or a small monitor, because you don't see that physically in the browser. Okay, with all this planning, let's actually code it so you can see what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to hop over to brackets, and I set up a root folder called 123, and I made an index and a CSS. My CSS just has some hex numbers in, so I could use some color to differentiate these sections. The index is completely empty, so I'm going to come in here and quickly kind of put in a head and put in a body. So we talked about how this is the basic of the basic skeleton of an HTML page. This is it. I also like to always reiterate that these two are always going to touch, and we'll put some stuff in here. And these two are always going to touch. And these two are always going to touch, but you can put stuff in here. So there's only two places within this skeleton where you can place things. So that's in the head or in the body. And the one thing that or two things we're going to put in the head really quickly would be the title. Make this a little bigger so we can see. And I'm going to link to my style sheet. So I already made my style sheet. And it's already in my root folder, so I can only link to anything that's in my root folder. If it's not over here on the left, it's a no-go. So I'll give this a title of 1, 2, 3. And with that being said, let's just quit my mail so we don't get a ton of things going on there. These are the two basic things that you're always going to include. You're going to also have your Google fonts up there, any other style sheets, maybe some JavaScript, meta tags later on, but thinking really basic is the title and the link always go within the head. Now let's go down to the body, and this is where we're actually going to work on our layout. So if I come up here, just like when I'm reading a book, I'm going to start in the upper left and kind of move across, then move back across, and then to the third column. So I'm going to start with this one big section at the top that has an outer and an inner. All right, I have too many open things. There we go. So I'm going to make a div, and I'm going to call this outer. So this is going to be that red outer div that's going to stretch 100%. I'm going to label the closed div so I don't get confused. Looks good. Now within this outer div is I'm going to put the inner div and then the logo and the nav. So it's within it. So to show that in code, you have to put it between the open and close of that div. So on this case, I could call this container, I could call this apple, banana, orange, but I'm going to call it inner. So you can get the concept of the outer, which is 100%, and the inner, which is the container. And we'll tab that over just to kind of make sense. I'm going to comment because it starts getting confusing really quick. And here we have those two divs. So let's jump over to our CSS and we'll start coding this a little bit. So I'm going to start with my body, squiggly, squiggly. And because I don't have a reset, I'm going to do a margin and padding 0. That gets rid of this little border around the entire page. And then I'm going to add my two new divs. So I did period outer, 2 squiggles, and inner. Notice it has a period in front of these div names, and the reason for that is because we made them classes. If this was an ID, it would have a pound in front of it. So like I said before, I want this outer to be a width of 100%. So I'm going to put 100% width. I'd have to know how high this is going to be. And at this point, let's just do like 300 pixels. You could always come back to your layout and kind of check it out. We can guess for this instance. And now we're going to give it a background color. And I would choose that red, or I could choose a different color. I'll just pick one of these from up here. And now we gave it a width, we gave it a height, and we gave it a background color. So if I preview this by hitting that little lightning bolt in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that's that width going 100% across, and it has that height. Now what we can do is set our inner. So the inner is not going to be 100%. It's going to be a set width, and I'm going to make it 960 pixels. I'll give it a height of 300 pixels. It can be the same height. And let's just give it a border real quick so we can see it. So I'll do a border, 3 pixels, solid black. I'm going to delete that then, but I just want to see that. And I'll preview it first to show you. So here's that box that I made that's within, and it looks great, except the only issue is it's not centered, right? I want it to stay centered. So not only do I want things to not fly to the left and right, but I want them to stay centered within my screen. And that's what that margin auto does. It's going to center our margins on the left and the right so they look like this. Now all of a sudden we have a composition. So my logo is not going to fly over here and my nav bar over here on all different monitor sizes. So here you can see the outer and the inner. I'm going to make that a tiny bit smaller. So that makes sense. So in every section you could have an outer and an inner if that makes it easier for you to understand. All right, let's hop back here and we're going to put the logo and our navigation in this. So this is a 2-column layout that's nested within our inner box, our inner div. So I'm going to do div class equals logo. I'm going to comment that this is closing the logo. And I don't have my images, so I'm just going to use the word logo. And then I'm going to do a nav. So I'm going to use the HTML5 nav because that's easier. And in here is where my navigation would go. So we'll just put about. We'll just put nav. It's not about that. We're more about layout here in this tutorial. Okay, so here we have 2 boxes. We have the logo that we added and the nav. They're in the inner and in the outer, nested. And if we come over here, you can see that they're not 2 columns. They're right underneath each other. So 2 columns should be side by side. And this is where the floating is going to come in. So I'm going to come back to my CSS, and I'm going to do period logo, and I'm going to do nav 2 squiggles. And I'm going to give, they both need a width. So for things to be side by side, they need a width. And in this case, I know my total width is 960, so we can't have these 2 widths add up to more than 960. So I'm going to say 400 pixels for both. That adds up to 800, right? We still have 160 space that we could use padding and margin. And we need to do float on the left and a float on the right. This is what actually makes them go next to each other. As you can see here, now we have these 2 boxes side by side, 2-column layout. And again, if you want to see those boxes, you could add a border, which I'll do here, make that border red so you can see it real quick. Here you can see physically how our layout is. The 2 divs, one float left, one float right, both 400 pixels. Sometimes that adding the border helps, and you can always take it out at the end. All right, let's just move those down a snug. I get that question a lot, is how to move things around. Like, okay, now they're in 2 columns, but I want them more in the center. So how I would do that is I would be adding to padding to my inner in this case. So if I add padding to my inner top, let's just say 100 pixels, you can see that that will move those down because the padding is within, so we can add it that way. Now, if we add, let's say, margin left to the logo and just say maybe 50 pixels, just to kind of snug that over, that works too because margin is on the outside. And I'll do that over here. So this would be margin right, 50 pixels. I like to keep the numbers consistent across the board. Now we have 2 columns that use padding and margin to move them in. That works great. So there's our 2-column layout. I am going to get rid of my, well, we'll keep my border. Now what we do is put a big image in. So I'm going to come down to my index, and underneath my outer, because I'm done with that section, I don't want this in that teal box, I'm going to make another div, and this one I'm going to call section. And this could be any name, it could be a div, but I like to use my HTML5. And this is going to be a big image, so I'm just going to put the word image in there. And then let's do the 3 column while we're at it. So because we had this as an outer class, I could reuse that again as an outer down here below. So you can reuse the outer and inner. And I don't think that's a bad idea. So I'm going to do that same thing again, but in this, instead of, and I'm copying and pasting for time, instead of, it's going to be teal here, and instead of being teal, let me save and refresh. You can see here, here's my image in the middle, and then this down here below. I don't want this to be teal. So I could do that a couple ways. I could give this a different name, right? I could call this outer 2 and come back to the top here and duplicate this and call it outer 2, so it's a different one, and then not have a background color on that version, which I think might be the easiest way to do things. Okay, so now we have that, and we have the inner in there, so things will stay centered. So let's just finish this off by coming back here now. We added that outer 2, which is the same thing, and this could be a different background color, so sometimes you'll see different colored sections as you go down. So we added section, and we added, we're going to add columns. So let's do period column. So for section, I want to give it a width, and I'm going to do 960 pixels because that's kind of my consistent inside width. And I'm just going to do margin auto so it stays put in the center. I'm going to give it a height so we can see it or it'll collapse. And for this instance, let's give it a background color so we can see a box. This is a surprise color, so let's see what happens. So this is where my 1 column would be. So you notice a 1 column is the entire size, which is 960 in this instance. I keep margins auto so it centers that image in the middle of the page. I gave it a height, I gave it a background color in this instance, but in all reality, I could put an actual image in here if we had one saved. So let's just look what that turned into. There it is. So this is our big image. You can see it lines up here. And now this final section down here, I want 3 columns within an inner. So I'm going to come back to my HTML real quick. And in this last section, I'm nesting this within, just like the Russian nesting dolls. And I'm going to call it column. And I'm going to do this, copy and paste that. So 3 times. I'll put stuff within it. So here I have outer 2, inner nested within, column, column, column within that. And sometimes you want to break down your website into these type of areas or sections. You know, we have that top one, we have the middle one, and we have this bottom one. Let's just give it a little CSS. So this is a 3 column layout. I know my columns cannot add up to larger than 960 because that's my inner. So you can either do, you know, width 33% each, float left. And this will do it to all 3 of our columns because we name them all the same name. So if we come back here, now we have column, column, column. Perfect. Last, I'll just do text align center here. And I'm going to give it another border just so you can see. Make this one orange. Oops, that's back to the original. All right, so we're really close here. So this one popped down because a border actually takes up space. So my suggestion would be here to do one of two things: to whittle that size down to, let's say, 32, which fixes it, or you could add box sizing border box that would neutralize that extra size. So if I do that, now we have a 3-column layout that I did text align center. So you can see here how we have a 2-column layout, a 1-column layout, and a 3-column layout. I always like to test my inners by hitting Command minus on the keyboard for Mac or Control minus for PC. And you can see how even when I zoom out and I'm at 67%, that everything stays in the middle of the screen. That's a good test. And then I always want to return to 100% because that's the real size of the website. So this was a tutorial on how to do 1-column, 2-column, and 3-column, and talking about the difference between the outer and the inner. Hope that helps.